I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Taxes fund governments and resident services such as schools, roads, and the police. We don't like paying them. We do because we must. Questions about who should pay taxes, how much should taxes be, and whether tax revenue is being effectively and efficiently used have long bothered human societies. And we are still getting riled up. Today, governments tax in infinite ways to meet practically insatiable demands from the people. Given that Maryland and its counties are going to go through a few years of revenue and spending imbalance, not budget deficit because state and local governments can't do that, I thought to invite veteran observer of local and state politics, Michael Sanderson, the longtime executive director of Maryland Association of Counties, known to many as MACO, to give us the Tax Revenue 101 lesson. As the organization representing the state's 23 counties and Baltimore City, MACO is one of the most powerful political forces in the state of Maryland. As it happens, next week, August 11th to 17th, is Maryland Tax-Free Week, in time for back-to-school shopping. Also next week, August 14th to 17th, MACO hosts its annual summer conference at Ocean City, where county and state leaders will gather to network and learn. And for the first time, I Hate Politics will be there, joining the conference's podcast row. If you are in OC, come say hi.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Alexandria, Virginia, art rock band Jackie and the Treehorns. Stephen Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on the bass and synth. And Brian Gibson on the drums. What would the world come to? Michael Sanderson, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to join. Long-time listener, first-time guest. I'm excited.
Great to have you. Where do state and county taxes come from? Just a very basic question.
Right. Like this is the explain it to me like I'm five kind of thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
This answer would be pretty easy maybe 2 generations ago, maybe 50 years ago, because state governments were mostly propelled by sales taxes and local governments were mostly propelled by property taxes. Things have gotten a little more complicated. The general fund is the easiest place to start. That's all. That's general purpose taxes for general purpose programs. It's about $25 billion. About 16 of that comes from income taxes, about another 5 from the sales tax, and then that leaves about $4 billion for everything else put together. So sometimes there's hue and cry about the taxes on alcohol or cigarettes or insurance premiums or other odds and ends and so forth, but basically is mostly income tax, then sales tax, and then everything else.
State budget is $60 billion. You said 25 in the general fund. That still leaves 35.
Right. all transportation is in its own special trust fund where you pay gas taxes, you pay tax on a vehicle, you pay your fees when you go to the MVA to get a license renewed. All that stuff is in a separate sort of self-maintaining special fund, and it's kind of parked off to the side. Higher education, just imagine all the operating funds of all the four-year colleges, all run through state special funds. So people pay tuition to go to UMBC or they go to St. Mary's. All those sorts of programs are run through state special funds. You have a variety of different enterprises like licensing programs. You get a cosmetologist license, you pay into a special fund that oversees the administration of cosmetologist licenses. For the most part in government, we like to think of the general fund as like the day-to-day general functions and general revenues, park other stuff into their own sort of self-managing, self-perpetuating special funds. And some of that money drifts in when times are tough, but that's kind of self-sustaining.
County is different.
General government budget for counties across the state of Maryland is in the same ballpark, about $25 billion. Components are different, though. That's about $10 billion in property taxes. And here in Maryland, individuals don't pay a tax on owning a car or like a desktop computer or other personal property. It's just real estate, just land and permanent buildings on land. Most people are familiar. You get an assessment every so often from the state. We think your property is worth this much. You want to file an appeal, you can do it. Then you pay a certain rate on your property. That's about $10 billion. Then counties in Maryland use an income tax at the county level. We're the only state in the country that has every county levy its own income tax. We use it as a principal local revenue source, more or less in place of a local sales tax in lots of other places, including Virginia. And then the everything else totals about $7 billion, and that's recordation and transfer taxes and hotels and energy taxes and telecom and a variety of other things. All those cats and dogs wrapped together is maybe another 1/4 or so of that pie.
Just to clarify, there is a personal property tax, but it only applies to businesses. Essentially, that's a tax on plant.
It's a fairly limited tax. The personal property tax paid on business property in Maryland, we have piece by piece been eliminating and exempting segments of that property. So if you're in the manufacturing business, we've decided we want to be competitive in manufacturing, so we'll waive all that stuff. Oh, what about your commercial inventory? Companies are like, hey, I want to be able to have stuff on the shelves, but I don't have to pay a tax on it every year. So that gets waived almost everywhere. And piece by piece, research and development stuff, all that's untaxed. You end up self-reporting your revenues, and you end up self-reporting the value of the stuff that you've purchased. And you got vehicles, you got computers, you depreciate them over time. You pay a little tax on the front end. It's not a monumental line item in local government's budgets anymore, honestly.
And who still pays that tax now?
It is a tax that is paid by corporate property owners. So if you have a flower shop, then you would pay on the equipment and so forth. That's all part of that business. So that is a personal property tax that you'd pay. Yeah. The similar kind of stuff, if you had in your home, you wouldn't pay.
Right. So, yeah. So if it's a refrigerator and things like
right.
that.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. There is no local sales tax.
Yeah, for the most part. In general, go have your $5 footlong sub at the local place. You pay $5.30, not $5, because the state has a 6% sales tax, but that is a state tax. There's no local component. You do the same thing down in Northern Virginia, and you actually are paying a 2-tier tax, where some of it goes to the Commonwealth of Virginia and some of it would go to the city or county where you're purchasing stuff. Here, we basically have substituted a local income tax instead of local sales taxes.
Big and small county, how do their tax structure differ?
Generally speaking, the larger jurisdictions in Maryland have more independence with revenue authority. They can do things like we want to put a local tax on telecommunication services, that kind of thing. Most of the charter counties, the larger jurisdictions, could do that on their own through their own, basically the authority that's granted to them by their voters through their charter, rather than coming to the General Assembly. Like Carroll County, pretty big, 250,000 people live in Carroll County. Carroll County still has to come to the General Assembly for all sorts of routine functions because they don't actually have home rule established through something like a local charter. So they'd have to come beg for it in Annapolis, but Frederick County could probably do that themselves.
In this large picture that you have just drawn, tell us what is progressive, what is regressive.
Historically, sales taxes, in heavier use in most states than they are in Maryland, tend to be a regressive tax. Who are the people who go right from hand to mouth, like their income turns into immediate spending? It's generally lower income residents. Those are your neighbors who are renting, who are living paycheck to paycheck. Their money goes right into groceries or and utility and rent and so forth. And to the extent that you're taxing consumption, they generally tend to be regressive. They fall on the lower income scales more. The theoretical way to get around that, when you do a sales tax, you might say, well, don't tax groceries. Don't tax prescription medication. Don't tax necessities. But then you've narrowed your tax base, and so there are fewer dollars in the till. The easiest revenue to make progressive is income taxes. Generally speaking, taxing based on income, you can do it basically on one rate. Most counties have a single rate. The state has increasingly moved into multiple brackets and multiple tiers. The idea of your first $30,000 of income is paid at this rate, and then your next $30,000 of income is going to paying at a higher rate. When you do brackets and income taxes, that's a way to enhance progressivity. Some people would say enhance fairness in your tax system. The piece that's tougher to measure is property taxes. So this is item number one and the menu for counties and for local governments. It's the biggest item in the room. And who ultimately really pays property taxes? Is it the landlord who actually feels the imposition of that tax? Or does it turn into added rent paid by the rent? Most people side with, this is a market condition. It becomes a cost of doing business or a cost of goods sold, and taxes get baked right into the rent and passed on to the renter, which means property taxes, generally speaking, come out relatively regressive as a revenue source.
Do you have a sense of how much of property taxes we are actually making on rental properties versus owner-occupied properties? That if, say, 90% of your property taxes come from, owner-occupied homes, then obviously the owner has the tax incidence. If 50% comes from rental properties,
sure,
then that's a different proposition.
My guess would be if you took out all the various commercial buildings and industrial property and so forth, you were just looking at residential, maybe somewhere to a third to a half is probably rental property. I would guess it's in that ballpark. But I still think even among homeowners, I still think that there is a regressive element to property taxes. I don't think people necessarily expand their spending on their own residence in direct proportion to every bit of new income. There are people who have a house that's twice as valuable as another house, sure, but I don't think that's because they have twice as much means to pay. I think it's more like those people have 5 times as much means to pay and they have double the home. I don't think it tracks 1-to-1, if you're following me.
Yes, it's not linear.
Yeah. So I think I would side with the majority who say property taxes are on balance a relatively regressive tax. And they land on renters, but even in the grander scale, they still come up slightly unfavorably in that regard.
Over time, where are we becoming more progressive? Where are we not making progress? Where are we probably becoming more regressive?
I got a couple answers to that are sort of overall trends. One is just simply in the legislature and in Maryland official policy, right? Passing legislation and changing the way taxes are applied and so forth. One thing that we're moving in the direction of progressivity is the single rate county income tax has just in the last 4 or 5 years become a local option to add brackets. We now have Anne Arundel and Frederick County have adopted brackets locally. My guess is 10 or 15 years from now, that'll be half the state that we'll end up seeing. We'll be moving in that direction. So that's a move toward having brackets and more progressivity in a meaningful local revenue source. Where we're missing out is we do lots of things by one single rate. The property taxes generally, the biggest chunk in local government revenues, and we are, at least the consensus view is the Maryland Constitution talks about uniformity among classes of property and so forth. It seems like you probably would have to amend the Maryland Constitution to do something that looked like bracketing of property tax rates. So if you have a home that's worth $250,000, you can't, and then another one that's worth $500,000. No jurisdiction has the ability to say, well, on the first $250,000, you pay this rate, and then on the next $250,000, you pay a differential, slightly higher rate to try and make property taxes more progressive. You can't do that in Maryland.
If you can define the categories differently. So, for example, you can say that apartments are different than single-family homes.
Right.
Or you could say, anything that is up to 1,500 square feet is one rate. That's a uniform category. And anything that is between 1,500 and 3,000 square feet is another rate. That's a different category.
I don't think this has actually been tested. So it's not like the General Assembly tried to do this and lost in court, and now there's very clear case law that says precisely what can and can't be done. If you had the assembled political will of the General Assembly and potentially the voters, you could introduce a different way to tax property that could be substantially more progressive than what we do today.
You said Anne Arundel and Frederick have moved to a tiered county income tax. Montgomery County, at least its county executive has been a big champion of that, but has not been able to move in that direction.
Right.
Why have those two counties been able to move and Montgomery County not been able to move?
The short answer here is the state has given counties the authority to use an income tax, but they put a cap on the rate. About 2/3 of Marylanders live in a county that has a single rate that's already at the 3.2% cap. So these are jurisdictions who have basically said, rather than use property taxes as our workhorse, we want to get the most we can out of income taxes that are at least neutral. A single rate income tax is nominally neutral on this regressivity, progressivity scale. Montgomery's maxed it out. Prince George's has maxed it out. Howard County's maxed it out. Baltimore City's maxed it out. A couple places like Frederick and Anne Arundel had not done so. So in recent years, the proposition for a place like Anne Arundel or Frederick to make a change in their system, they could say, let's create a higher bracket and maybe let's just give some relief on a lower bracket, and it can be revenue neutral, or maybe it's part of an overall revenue increase. So that's a different budgeting proposition than what faces a place like Montgomery County. If you're already at the cap, the only way you can introduce any progressivity is by giving a break at the low end and taking a ding in your actual revenues, which you either need to offset by reducing services or finding the revenue somewhere else like property taxes, then you're back against regressivity.
Is that anywhere in Maryland a serious proposition that you want to reduce income tax for your lowest income citizens at the county level? That's
exactly what happened in Anne Arundel County. They created some relief on the low end, a higher bracket on the higher end. They're in the process of doing their budget now, but their proposal is to adjust the higher end to sort of keep up with the times right now. But Anne Arundel did it, but again, they started somewhere below the max. That gave them room to move. So what counties who are at the max now would need is a bill to pass through the General Assembly to give them authority either generally to go above 3.2, or I think this is more politically palatable, to go above 3.2 if you're adopting a tiered system and you exceed the 3.2 only for an upper bracket of some sort. So I think that is a politically viable idea. And in the next 2 to 6 years, I think the General Assembly is likely to pass that and give that new authority to the counties.
Very, very interesting. So you talked about some difference between commercial and residential property. What is the balance in property taxes between those two groups?
Residential is the biggest piece of the property tax universe. A large downtown office building might have an eye-popping dollar value, or a shopping mall or something along those lines. Oh, that's amazing. That's a $200 million property. But as it turns out, it's really the residential market is what drives property tax.
Why should a $200 million big building not pay a proportional tax the same as residential?
The construction of the property tax system in Maryland is supposed to be absolutely linear. My $200,000 home and that $200 million shopping mall on that real property should be paying the exact same rate. So they should be paying 1,000 times as much as mine. There just aren't 60,000 of those shopping malls, but there's 60,000 homes like mine.
But there seems to be a much greater dependence on residential property as opposed to commercial property in the tax structure, especially at the county level. And that seems to be having some impact, don't you think?
It's another area where the local governments would need authority from the General Assembly if we wanted to create those kinds of classes of property to have different rates apply. Montgomery County has one real property tax rate, and it's applied on the value of your real property. So there's two questions of fairness here. One is the $200,000 home versus the $200 million shopping mall. And right now, the only way to tax them is at a 1,000-to-1 ratio. You can't say commercial property pays twice as high of a rate. The second thing that I think is, like you might be hinting at as well, is my home is in a neighborhood where there's a lot of evidence of a market. Even the algorithm of the Zillow website can do a pretty decent job telling me what my house is worth today, because there's a comparable market, and you can look at similar sized, similarly situated property, and you can scale by square feet and so forth and get a pretty good guess. That $200 million shopping mall may not have a comp anywhere closer than Pittsburgh, and you're reliant more on self-reported income, and income data from the company, and that's dicier, I guess.
It is dicey. That's no doubt about it. Is there a delta? Is there a difference between what the assessment value of this commercial building is versus the market value of that commercial building? So there is a market value. I mean, if the owners were to put up that building for sale, they would get an X amount of dollar. And if there were to be a delta between that and the assessed value, then we ought to be looking at that difference because we're leaving money on the table.
Maryland's unique in this regard that it's a state agency that does assessments of properties. They do an analysis every year to try and find that ratio of what they find as an assessment versus what the market will bear. And it usually comes in the 90-something% ratio.
Wow, okay.
I mean, it's generally self-correcting, right? I mean, if I believe my home is worth $200,000 and I get an assessment for $250,000, I have a motivation to spend a little money to appeal my assessment. And I'll either hire somebody who does this for a living, or I'll take the time to request all the files and contest it and so forth to try and contest that assessment. So if they overshoot the number, there's an appeals process to get it fixed. If they undershoot the number, I don't have any motivation to go down and say, no, I'm worth way more than that, right? I mean, you want to look like a pauper to the tax man,
sure,
but look like a millionaire to your neighbors and the people you're trying to impress.
When SDAT, the state agency that does the assessments, when they do this analysis, do they break it down by county or zip? Because I think that would make a difference. I think the number would be very close in somewhere like Allegheny or Garrett. But if you go to Bethesda, I think it'd be really different.
That's probably fair. But in an area like Bethesda, you would expect that there should be comparable sales that should give a professional assessor at least a reality check. That if they've got data from the company that says this unit is generating this amount of income for us. And if you capitalize that income and turn it into a value, we say this is worth $4 million. And then you look around at similar properties, similar sized properties that are up and down, the same major thoroughfare and so forth. And in a place like Bethesda, there probably have been 20 sales in the last 5 years. And you have a better second look there than you might have in Cumberland, where the one property might literally be a unicorn there. And if they say this is all that's making, you might not have anything else to go on. So I don't know where the error is necessarily higher. The more unusual or peculiar the property, the larger the opportunity for genuine error there is, just because comparables start to fail you.
So not in Bethesda so much, but in Wheaton, in downtown Wheaton, there are a handful of pretty large property owners. It seems that they almost prefer to leave their stores and things empty rather than rent to like a mom and pop operation with a not strong enough balance sheet. They'd much prefer Potbelly or Subway to come in and sort of rent. And most of these properties are paid for. I mean, they are already, they bought them many, many years ago, maybe decades ago. And so they may have a couple of stores, a couple of floors occupied, and that's their income. And that income, when you capitalize it, when you add, multiply by the cap rate, as it's called, then you get a certain number. And that number could very well be pretty low so that your tax burden is low. And then you don't care. And meanwhile, you're getting large capital appreciation as the county grows in population and, land demand.
I don't think it's quite as simple as if this year you collected zero rent on a piece of property that nominally should be income producing property because of a rental stream. It's not as simple that you now go and you report to the state, this was vacant for the last 12 months, and therefore this piece of property has no value because it has not actually generated any rent. The assessor is duty bound to look at sort of the highest and best use of commercial property. Now, at some point, if a piece of property is sort of beyond repair or is in such a hopeless location that it's now been 7 years since anybody was willing to rent the property, there may at some point become a case that, okay, now it really has no income producing potential and the write down of its assessment should go way down. But I think the financial motivations here, you got to keep them in scale, right? I mean, property taxes are basically 1% of the value of a property. I mean, in Maryland, that's a decent thumbnail. So if you're paying about 1% in property taxes, what you'd get back, even in meager rents, would be an awful lot more than what you'd be paying out in higher property taxes generated by that activity.
I multiply that by risk, though. That's what I said.
Right.
They'd happily rent it to Potbelly or Subway, but they don't want to rent. So this is the trouble with Class C retail, especially in a place like Wheaton, somewhat in College Park.
There's more than taxes at work there, and I'm skeptical that the notion of someone who owns property would rather rent it to a big name chain that does advertising and has a name and that kind of stuff, as opposed to what feels like a shakier proposition, the mom and pop startup. I think their motivations there are probably multifold. It's possible taxes are part of it, but I think it's other motivations probably first.
What are the most promising tax proposals you are seeing ahead of you?
In Maryland, we're seeing a drive for funding for schools. So in the years ahead, we know that both the state and county governments will be challenged to find more resources to support the blueprint, which is a big, ambitious, and important plan to improve what we get out of our public schools. So I can't do that justice, but as a prelude, we're going to need to look at our revenue structures. we already kind of touched on the idea of taking flat taxes and looking at ways for them to become tiered or more progressive. I think that's interesting as a local option. I think the state needs to consider that and look at where its counties are currently handcuffed and consider at least loosening those bounds. So things like the income tax, possibly having tiers in property taxes, or things like our recordation transfer taxes, they all seem like candidates for look again. Should you pay a higher rate for your transfer tax once you're over $250,000 on your home property or something like that? I don't know what the answer is, but as a matter of policy, I think that's out there. Another one that I think is interesting, like I mentioned, you use a sales tax and you apply it to certain things. You don't tax groceries because that feels regressive and unfair, and those are needs. Well, Maryland has a base for its sales tax that is increasingly a smaller and smaller piece of the actual economy. That buying goods, like physical things that you walk out of a store in a bag, that used to be the lion's share of our day-to-day economy. And I don't remember the last time I went to a computer store and bought a CD-ROM that had a computer game on it, right? I mean, I do that sort of stuff, but I mean, the last game I bought, I just did an electronic download because I don't need to buy the device any longer.
But you didn't pay any tax?
I did pay a tax on that because Maryland revised its own sales tax to cover. So we're doing like bits and pieces, but it's exactly that. We're just doing bits and pieces. We have not looked in a massive way at our whole structure and saying, where has the economy changed? And we're still like the yoke is on the old economy and the new economy is not the same place.
Well, so the largest growing sectors of the economy are healthcare and education and maybe housing. And none of those are taxed with sales tax.
I don't think any of those are candidates to become newly taxed. It's fringe stuff. Like we have, like the local governments in Maryland have an admissions and amusements tax, which is basically, it's like a miniature sales tax for particular kind of things, like a movie ticket. But if you download that same movie and watch it at home, that's not an activity that is taxed in anywhere near the same way. So the state has put a sales tax on that because they rifle-shotted that particular issue. I think a shotgun approach to a number of tax systems and say, let's look at horizontal equity. This activity is basically the same as that activity. It just came along sooner. That one came along sooner and that has been taxed. The newer thing isn't being taxed, and now they get they get to draft it, they get to end run it.
What's an example?
Cable television companies pay a franchise tax, but not their more recent arrivals that compete with them just through the internet lines. I think there's a variety of things like that that we do today in lieu of what we did yesterday, and we tax the yesterday thing, but not the today thing. Treat similar things similarly in your tax system to be as fair as possible.
Michael Sanderson, Executive Director of Maryland Association of Counties. Thank you. I look forward to taxing tomorrow with you.
I'm going to come out of this sounding like I'm the pro-tax advocate or whatever. I'm a big fan of fairness, and I know we've got a mission that needs to be supported by revenues, so I want to see our folks have ways to get there. Thanks for having me on. It's been a joy talking to you.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analyses. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer, Adama Gay, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Alexandria, Virginia alt rock band, Jackie and the Treehorns. Steve Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on bass and synth. And Brian Gibson on drums. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe, share, and rate the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Give it some time and I'll be front page news. I tell you what, I've got nothing more to lose. I might be too much for you to explain. My own persistence ends and mortal remains.